Well, welcome to the Church Office podcast. My name is Gavin Smith, and it's a thrill to welcome you today. And my special guest today is Tim Wyatt from a family accountancy firm based in Leeds, mate. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
In Leeds. Well, Gavin, thanks so much for having me on. It's a real treat to be on. I've thoroughly enjoyed listening to various episodes of the podcast with lots of very interesting people. And whether you class me as a special guest, I don't know, but it's great to be on. So I really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
And so kind of fellow board member Penny Clark up in Bolton, she said, "You got to meet my accountant. He is wicked."
I've never actually heard the word wicked and accountant put in the same sentence before, but I will take that. I absolutely will.
I think listeners, you are going to enjoy Tim today, and we're talking finance. We've put together a whole series of questions, things that as we come out of the pandemic, difficulties that we might have faced, things that we can think about going forward. So today's going to be really helpful, I think, mate, and really practical. So,
well, I hope so. I hope I can pass on some things that will be helpful and some thoughts and reflections, and just what we pick up from the day to day will be helpful. So, yeah. Great.
So you're an accountant, Lord. So you're working for a family firm. Tell us a bit about yourself and your work. And
yeah, so in the mighty Leeds, I'm a proud Yorkshireman up in the north, and there's married to my wife Sarah, and we have two young children. Part of a theme in my kind of wider family is we for the past 4 generations, so going up to my great grandfather, he was an accountant, and my grandfather was desperate to not be an accountant and be a musician, but back in those days he was rather forceful, said no, that's no profession to follow, and he became a qualified accountant like his dad, and worked in what is now he worked in a firm that was built on Christian principles, and when he felt that the large firm that is now Mazars, people might have heard of Mazars, the firm he was working there, felt it was going in a different direction. He decided, right, I'm going to take a risk and we'll set up our own family practice, which ended up being in Leeds. My dad took on the baton, and for one of the, not too sure how, but for one of the themes that come out of this family season is we've always seemed to work with churches and charities, which my dad took that baton on in working with a number of frontline charities within domestic abuse, mental health, and various things. And I then qualified with one of the large firm in the UK, and happened to fall into the charity specialist team, which didn't choose to do that. It's just one of those things that I think God's brought in, and I've kind of taken that further on, and me and my dad kind of worked together with our team on that. So it's a really interesting family thread of what God's been doing with us, and we absolutely love working with churches and charities particularly, and we've got a real heart to see God's kingdom advance, and where we can support that in terms of financial, accounting support, governance support, then we try our best to do that. So as well as all the other bits and pieces that accountants do as well, but that's a thread of what we do. So
Excellent. And you're working with churches right across the country, and Leeds, you've got Expense Plus that come out of a church up in Leeds. So you guys must be working together at points.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So I'm sure some of your listeners will use the accounting software cloud-based package Expense Plus. If you haven't, I'd recommend having at least a look at it. And what's really interesting is another weird thing that God just weaves is that Expense Plus was birthed from a church, a New Frontiers church in Leeds. I go to the other New Frontiers church in Leeds, and half of our team actually come from my church, because there just seems to be quite a lot of finance skill set, and we've just got this rather strange thing that there are services popping out of Leeds to support the churches in accounting services that it's just one of those strange things that God's done, which is great. So
happy days, mate. Well, it's lovely to have you on, and thanks for taking these questions I've prepared for you to think about. So what have been, from your experience, you're working with lots of churches in the background, operations staff and church administrators. you're covering lots of churches, I guess, in audits, accounts, giving advice. What are some of the challenges that churches have faced during the pandemic, and coming out of it?
Yeah, it's really interesting. So one of the huge privileges, we provide we do a lot of independent examinations. We don't do the large churches in audit, statutory audit land. But one of the things we do is, obviously we have lots of conversations with churches. But one of the privileges we get is we get to check all the meeting minutes that have happened during the year and around the year. So actually we don't just have those conversations, but we get to read and understand the real nitty-gritty of what's going on in church life at the leadership level, at the trustee, PCC, whatever, however your church is structured level, and just to really get a feel of what those challenges have been. And if you were to write a list, you would probably struggle to get it on one side of A4. But if I was to summarize, I think some of the themes that have come through from a finance point of view is those churches that have relied heavily on lettings and conferencing income has been really challenging. That obviously that just disappeared overnight, and a lot of churches have been really happy that they had a diverse income stream that wasn't just reliant on one thing, but actually those taking at least one of those away became a real challenge. And actually I was chatting with a friend recently where that's still a challenge for some churches, because some organizations that would use the conferencing have decided not to go back to as much physical meeting and various other bits and pieces. So has caused those financial challenges around keeping members and church members on board with the journey, as just that natural separation, and not being physically meeting, and just the outworking of that has often meant that some people who are donating and contributing to the life of the church have dropped off, and that those income lines dropping off, and that's the challenges that's outworking in setting budgets for the financial year that we're in and looking forward. And we know that there are a number of churches for the first time in a number of years that are having to wrestle with setting a deficit budget and what that looks like. But the other thing as well, I think it's really important to highlight, is actually a lot of churches, and I'm sure there'll be listeners as well, have actually came out of the pandemic financially better off, because they'd end up having that sustainability from the government's furlough scheme, with donations still carrying on. And for a number of churches I'm aware of, actually it was a huge blessing to them that they were able to get to a point of having a reserve that they really wish they'd had for a while, and give them a bit of a firm foundation and a footing to be able to, like, right, God, how do we, we've got a bit of a buffer here to be able to press on and invest in a number of areas and continue the work we're doing. So there's a bit of a mixed picture that's come through financially, which is really interesting as we kind of look ahead into what's, we've gone from one season of pandemic life and are now surrounded by a whole new set of challenges in cost of living and various other needs that are going to continue to crop up in this season. So it's real
those
contrast.
Two things. I think we found that as well. The churches that I've spoken to have some churches have seen some of the stats that are out there. Any churches have lost between 10 and 25% of their giving.
Absolutely.
Their income, and it's that kind of significant, isn't it? A quarter of your budget is gone, and you now got to manage that. And then there are others, like you say, that where they've got good structures in place, where there's standing orders, where there's online giving, where there's those things have already been built into the culture of the church and the way that people give every week as part of their worship. They found that the income is maintained, and they've cut back on their spending because ministries haven't been running in the same capacity. So
absolutely. So a lot of churches have found that those savings and brought about a good, some churches managed to have a good surplus during pandemic times, which I think some churches find that actually they've got to hold this next season of potential deficit planning with the last season of actually we've God's given us a in terms of the harvest, if you use phrases like the harvest, and he's given us a good harvest, and actually we've potentially come for a challenge time. And the question is how long is those challenges going to remain for the number of churches to juggle and see through and just see God's God's provision over. So it'd be really interesting to see how this season continues to pan out from a finance perspective for lots of churches.
Does. Yeah, and I think individuals are going to be, hugely affected. I know this week there's been announcements of support for the rise of living costs, and the chancellor's outlined some help that lots of families, in our churches are going to benefit from. But you're talking in March, in October, aren't you? Again, of a hike again up in energy prices. And that does impact the church, doesn't it? Not just in the giving, but in our operational costs. Everything just seems to be costing more and more money now, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I was a few reflections on this. If you look at a typical church's accounts, the three big areas you would see are staff costs, building costs, and external giving to organizations, individuals, and or those identified areas of need that crop up. And if you look back at the pandemic times, staff costs weren't necessarily an issue because you had that backfall from the government in the furlough scheme. Building costs were just not being used, apart from those challenges of making buildings suitable and equipment to be able to do church really well during pandemic season. And then external giving took quite a big increase from what we've seen, even though I don't have official statistics. We could see that theme of actually there's need that we need to make. So you can see there's actually a nice balance there during pandemic times. Now, as we kind of moved into this season, the pressure on staffing costs, on building costs, and external giving are seeing pressures in all three corners. And I was having quite a detailed conversation with a friend about as they were navigating deficit budget spending, of there is a pressure on all three of those core areas that churches invest in, and having those really difficult discussions and weighing on God as to where does the priority need to sit. Are we in a season where we need to invest in our staff because cost of living is going up and we need to really honor them and look after them? Buildings, even though they cause us a huge headache, are so important. They're the spaces there we meet, and without them, there's lots of things that just can't happen, and costs for premises are going through the roof. So it's a real difficulty at the moment for a number of churches in just really knowing where and how do we navigate this, and where is the priority to invest in this season. So it's really interesting and tricky times, and hat off to anybody who's trying to navigate that in your current setting. So
absolutely right. I think
keep going.
Trustees out there that are serving in these roles, that there are, then most roles aren't paid, are they, where you're caring for a church, leading in a trustee role. Thanks for all the difference you make. I know our trustees have been huge help during the pandemic, and huge help in just checking in with staff, checking in with finances. Is there anything else that they can do? Do we want to bounce any ideas off? So I've had more conversations with trustees in the last couple of years than previous 10 years.
It's really interesting,
and that's healthy, isn't it?
It's good. Yeah, really good. It's really interesting to hear, because from our role in kind of supporting either with an outsourced capacity or doing the examination, we're talking to trustees quite a lot. But it's really interesting to hear that your experience is actually, because of this time, you've had so much more contact, and it's a really good thing. And I think if there's one thing I was going to kind of, if there was an encouragement I would give to churches coming out of the pandemic season and moving forward into kind of whatever this next season is of navigating cost of living crisis, and re-establishing those church rhythms post-pandemic, as we can see so many churches doing that reflective exercise of what is church for us looking like, what are our priorities. I think one of the biggest encouragements I would have is to take hold of what you've described as that good governance. Really good governance, where you've had lots of conversation with trustees. If there's one area that I'm really passionate about the church growing in, is good governance, and what that means. And what I find time and time again as I talk to churches is that that governance is often seen as a big compliance tick box. We have a good risk register. We have some sort of reserves policy, and we have, we do check in conflicts of interest, and it's kind of a tick box. But one of my big encouragements would be is that if you can do governance really well, like we've learned some of the lessons of doing governance well in the past season with the pandemic, it can serve us really well moving forward. And I give a quick example. I was really challenged when I was talking to a good friend, as we were just thinking about pandemic life in church setting, and just wishing, Lord, I really wish I had a Joseph moment, where you gave me a dream and we knew what was going on. We would know. You would tell us through a dream, and you would have given us the words Pfizer and lockdown, and we could have had a plan. We could have had the risk register topped up and the budget sorted and people ready, and we'd have smashed COVID
7 years.
season. Yeah, we'd have smashed. Yeah, we'd have done the whole 7 years, and it would have been amazing, and it'd have been great. And I was really challenged by that because of what Jesus said in Matthew 24, where he makes it so clear that do not be surprised, because you will hear of rumors of wars, famines, natural disasters. And I remember very distinctly the day that Boris popped up on our TV screens, and even more recently the news of Ukraine, and just that feeling of shock and surprise of, even though we're told to know that these big events and things are going to happen, that we've warned to expect them. And one of the things I find challenging from a governance perspective, particularly in churches, is actually that's something we can be doing actively, is doing good proactive governance. That means that we have created a foundation in our churches that means we can respond quickly to whatever is going to come our way, whether it's a small local challenge or a huge, big, global challenge like the pandemic. And I give two examples. One is risk management. A lot of organizations that I work with do have some sort of risk management, and it's usually a tick box exercise. But if you're able to have a risk register and risk assessment process, some really good resource from the Charity Commission on this, by the way, would really recommend listeners having a look at them. But if you had an active risk management process that was horizon scanning, which was embedded in the culture of the kind of church governance, you're able to create a foundation there where you can respond really quickly to changing risks and opportunities that the church is coming across in a quick way. So actually we're able to be in a very different position to responding to what's going on, but actually being able to be quickly responsive to some of these things. The other one I'll mention quickly, which I think, again, I have a lot of conversations with churches about, is around reserves policies. Yeah, they're possibly the most boring things you could think about, but actually
important. Yeah,
they're really important. And actually, there's a bit of myth debunking I'd like to do. Is a lot of organisations think, reserves policy means we just need to have 3 months of running costs or 3 months of staff costs in the bank. And one of the things the Charity Commission really encourages organisations to do is for the trustees and management and leadership to really understand what reserves do you as a church actually need to hold at any one time for rainy day, for investment, for anything else, and get out of this frame of mind of it has to be 3 months. And if you do have a reserves policy in your organisation, church particularly, where you know exactly how much you really need to be carrying, it means that in any given situation that arises a need, you're able to respond quickly and say, actually, we have X in the bank. We only really need this. And actually, we've got this to spend. And I wonder if there's, there are times in church life where actually we carry for knowing for the safety of the longevity of the organization, maybe more funds than actually we really need to carry in seasons when needs do arise. So 2 examples there, I guess, sort of encouragements from me on what good governance could look like, if that makes sense. So.
I think it's good, and it is interesting to review those kind of reserve things. We had a church down the road from us that burnt down, and they had some reserves, but the project, 3 years on, they still haven't got a rebuild. They're still on the way to doing that, and you think all these things will just quickly fall into place and it'll be fine. We'll find another venue, we'll be able to move staff quickly to another place, we'll be able to get the resources that we need together. But it doesn't always work like that, does it? And I guess we either think really kind of like worst case scenario, or we think, or we don't think.
Yeah,
and we're talking about how do we actually we bring some points in between those two different points of view.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
What do we actually need? What would it look like?
What would it look like? And I think there's some really helpful exercises to do. And I think the biggest challenge is making those processing exercise not a tick box exercise, but something that's ingrained with how churches are making decisions and reviewing things, and how you can get those two to marry up. I think it's a tricky one. The other last thing I'd love to
go for it, mate.
Mention on in governance is one of the things I'm very aware coming out of the pandemic life and the season. If you look at the big picture of the church, is we've had some very high profile across the media cases of large churches and Christian organizations almost disappear overnight, or had gone through really difficult times, mainly because of the root cause of some of them is the governance that has surrounded those organizations. And it's another one of the reasons why I'm really passionate about governance. And I think particularly coming out of COVID times and navigating the season we're in, is that, and if you look particularly in certain sectors of online media, there is a bit of eyes looking at churches' governance at the moment. I know very recently there's a very large documentary on Hillsong, and have been other publications on other areas. And actually, church governance is such an important, integral part of what we do to make sure that actually the integrity of what our churches are doing within the public is seen and is tested. So yes.
Let me add to that, because it is so important, isn't it? Because it's so detrimental to the gospel, isn't it? Where something goes wrong and there's been poor governance, and the name of the church and the gospel opportunity is hindered because we haven't done these things. We haven't met our responsibilities, and it's so important. So linking this kind of governance to the gospel is so important. We want to do governance right, and because that enables us to do the gospel well and to reach out with the gospel. And people are cynical about churches. We want your money,
absolutely.
Or they waste the money, or all these different things going on. And there's simple viewpoints that if we can have the correct governance, we can have the right transparency, the right systems, and the right tools in place to do all that we need. There are people out there that can help us. If you don't feel like that is the case for your church, if you're sat in a role thinking, oh, I wonder how we would match up against what we're talking about here, there's places you can go for help. And building a good relationship with your accountant is so important.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one of the reasons why I know they rarely get looked at, the year-end accounts and various things that get published online. But one of the reasons why I'm passionate about that line of work is because it's a level of integrity and public accountability that helps build those trusts. And as I say, there is cynicism and something about the church, particularly with what gets to the media. And I would love the day where we get a headline that says church smashing good governance, good integrity in these churches, because obviously you only get the bad, you only get the negative press, but if you're someone who's investing in those areas in your church, it is building the integrity in the big picture. So
absolutely
keep doing
going.
What you're doing and keep going.
Good. Let me ask you questions, keeping on this kind of governance view. A lot of churches have been thinking about CIOs. I know they've been around for probably 10 years with the Charities Commission, and that there's a push, isn't there? The fact that it's harder to find trustees because of the liability potentially. I mean, if you're sat on a big asset with a building, you feel a little bit more protected. But there are some limitations to being a trust, aren't there? And I know the Charities Commission are pushing these CIOs. What are your thoughts on this? Because I can look at churches could be like, it's just going to be a whole load of work to become a CIO.
Paperwork, red tape.
Nobody wants to do
stuff.
this. Like, bring this down. Give us a perspective on this, mate.
Yeah, absolutely. So a CIO, for those who are listening and are not kind of comfortable in the kind of legal sector, and I'm must caveat, I'm not a huge expert on this, but obviously come across it a lot with the work we do. A CIO is essentially a legal shell that houses a charity, and it's a relatively new form. And before CIOs came along, you either were an unincorporated charity where essentially if something was to go wrong, the liability on the trustees could potentially be quite high, or you were an organization that was a limited company with registered at Companies House that had charitable status, and you end up in this situation where you report to Companies House following Companies Act law, and you report to the Charities Commission following the Charities Act and all the rest of it. And CIOs are a really lovely blend of the limited liability that trustees have if something was to go wrong, in a more simple legal structure compared to having being a limited company and charitable organisation. So they are a much more simpler legal structure for an organisation. And I think there's some really good thoughts around if you are a church who are an unincorporated organisation from just a pure legal point of view, and if things were to go wrong, and we know that they do from time to time, things they do, then actually it is a very good legal structure to be able to do. And even though yes, there is red tape and there is administration challenges and legal things to work through, they are a one-off investment that you will not have to do again for some time. And I think it's probably just working out whether, if you're weighing up those decisions, what timing is right, and various bits and pieces. But, with the right help, they can be fairly headache-free for you and your church is my experience. So, so some really good things to think about. And
there's so much good information on the Charities Commission site about it, and the two different options.
There's loads,
voting, members not voting, just leadership. So there's all those things. And there's I don't know all the answers on this, but we've often spent money on changing trustees with the land registry when the trustees left and new, and there's a general ongoing cost, and you do it because it protects the asset. But there's talk, and I'm waiting for it to be clarified with a lawyer, to say that actually a CIO can be listed with the land registry, and so the trust could be listed in that sense, or the charity could be listed. So you don't have to keep ongoingly changing this. So we're looking into that at the minute, and I think there's some helpful things there, isn't there? Because so and so has been a trustee for 20 years. He disappears or leaves. What do you do here now? How do you protect the asset? Because he's actually down as one of the owners, essentially. The land registry.
Absolutely. So there's lots of those little things, and where there are some fantastic organisations that can help navigate all of those things. Where we particularly provide support, and where things can get confusing is all the finance side, when one legal entity is closed and your new legal entity is setting up, and what that does for your accounts. But my encouragement would be is if you feel like it's right, but you feel daunted by the detail and what it all means, is do seek some help. And I know you've got an article on the Church Office website, haven't you? That you've, I think, gone up fairly recently, haven't you, on this?
Within the last week.
Provides a really nice overview actually from reading it. But there's some good stuff out there. So don't be put off if it's just feeling like a daunting task for your church, particularly if you're a smaller church where those sorts of skill sets and resources may not be readily available to you. Do
absolutely right. I spoke to one church who were put off because they were going to need to do more reporting for the Charities Commission, but the reporting is is straightforward. Once you've got your head around what you need to do, and so there's lots of stuff. So I think that's an interesting conversation and worth considering, because people spend money on kind of trustee indemnity insurance and protecting, and it's not cheap. And in the same way that a director is protected by a limited company, there's definitely some benefits there. So
absolutely. Absolutely. So
that's great. I think the whole governance side of things is good. Help us with some of the practical things then here of churches. I had a trustee the other day saying, golly, someone keeps asking me for training, and they want to go to this conference and they want to go to that conference. And I know they've not been together for ages, but this is costing us money. And so as we think about budgets coming back, after the conference and after the pandemic, and wanting to rebuild the church and think about what we're doing, there's got to be some change, isn't there? And what are some of the things that you've seen changes, or you'd recommend that people consider? I think that would be helpful to hear.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one, and it's picking up on some of my own reflections and some of the themes that picking up from churches, and just recognizing that, first of all, that there's so many churches in so many different situations. So one of the big things that's always stuck with me, it was one of the lead partners of the accounts practice I trained with, which was one of the Big 10, and he whenever we had a full staff meeting, it would often be quite large because it was a fairly large firm, he would always start by saying the biggest asset that this organization has is not on the balance sheet. And you can tell he was talking to accountants, because he's using an accounting analogy to encourage the staff. Is not the buildings, is not the equipment, it's the staff, it's the people. And one of the things that I think a number of organizations are reflecting on, and I think as we talked about, at the start of those tensions of staff costs, building costs, and external giving, is you cannot neglect the vast importance that people are to the church. And it was really interesting to listen to your podcast from, I think it was your last episode on leadership, that I guess touched on a bit of this this theme about people, and being able to invest in people is really important. And it's trying to balance all these things of really asking the question of what is the priority for my church. And I do wonder if there was encouragement for me in this season, is I do find that working in the charity sector is that and the not-for-profit sector is that cost of living increases, for example, are often really tricky discussions, because there is no necessary link to the income increasing, whereas businesses can often just increase their prices or change their price point, and cost of living can happen. Whereas in churches and charities, that's much harder. And I do wonder if there is a season where we do need to look after the people we have in our church, in particular our staff members who are essential to running what the church does and enabling the church to do what they do. And I do wonder if we are in a season where everyone's got to make, like individuals have got to make some tough choices about our own budgets. I do wonder if we're in a season where actually generously and faithfully investing in the people we have in church is one of those things. So it's really difficult to say, I think churches should reduce costs here, reduce costs there, because everyone's priorities are different. But if there was a feeling I'm getting from churches and the charities I work with, is that we mustn't undervalue the people that we have around us, and we're in that tricky situation where inflation is at 9% at the moment, and it is likely to keep going up. And how we honor, if you as a church are able to honor the staff members you have by some sort of cost of living and investment in them, that's fantastic. But having said that, I don't want to come on here and say that that's where you should put your investment, because obviously everyone's got different pressures and everyone's got different things. But if there's one thing I do think that can easily get missed off the agenda, because it's sometimes hard to navigate in churches the way church is structured, is investing in staff and people. So that's just really one thought. Thought on that. So.
Yeah, that is so helpful. And you're right, every church is different, and the priorities are different. And for many people, maybe in our roles as administrators or operations, there are other people in ministry that are thinking about what's essential, and so then the budget follows those essential things. So we may not necessarily be involved in that decision making. But I guess I'd love to try and be creative with the finances. And I took a bit of stick on that from a pass the other day. Creativity and finances shouldn't go together. But
it can sound dodgy, can't it?
It does sound a bit dodgy.
But yes, I totally know what you mean. Yeah.
But it's worth just sitting down with your budget for a couple of hours and going, where can I suggest some changes? What are the things that we can consider? Switching coffee, switching cups. Go down to that kind of level of detail. What are some of the things that we can do? And just having some suggestions. I think often the people that I serve in ministry, they don't think this way. And so I can actually really serve by saying, do you know what, if we did this slightly differently, where we normally put on a meal here, but if we were to put on a dessert reception, we could reduce the cost by £3 or £4 per head. And over 400 people, that makes a difference.
Absolutely.
And so is there ways that we can do that? And I guess try and be creative, try and sit down and think about it, because that will serve your teams to do that.
Absolutely. And the other great thing about that is it helps everyone come on the journey with you in owning owning and shaping church budget and direction. And those can be they can be tricky exercise to do. But if done well, you can bring people aboard. And I think the real key thing, I think, when going through a budget setting process, or just continue re-looking at budgets, like I know some churches will be, and I was having a long, good conversation with somebody recently where they've set a deficit budget and the projections are even lower than they were hoping. Is how do you bring church leadership on that financial journey in seeking God together about his provision, but also making those tough choices and really working out what are the priorities, what are the priorities, are there any other lessons we can learn from the pandemic of actually these were really the priorities, and we've managed to albeit in a very different way, run church in a very different way on a lower cost. Are there any lessons we can learn from that? So I think it's a really great thing of doing things in team and together and drawing out ideas. Exercise.
And one of the things that I guess one of the principles that I've tried to install in our staff is that when we give a budget, I want the team to spend it and invest it in their area. And what I'm thinking down the road is I don't want everyone to go, oh, we could save money here, we could save money here. And then in 3 years' time, we've got a whole ministry area that's been underinvested, that's then going to require £10,000 to reinvigorate and to get back to where it was, where for the last 3 years they've only been spending £1,000 out of £3,000 budget. So there's some wisdom needed, isn't there? It's not just spending less, but it's going, actually, how can we continue to invest what's important, that we don't underinvest an area that later on we're saying, oh, please help us, we need more here.
Absolutely, such wisdom needed, because whenever you start talking about saving money, and it can just lead to that wrong the mindset you're not wanting to achieve, and going down the if your aim is to save the pennies, as many pennies as you can, and that becomes a bit of your objective, as opposed to what what that money's there to serve. And it's trying to get that balance of not serving the money, but trying to use what money there is to serve what you're doing, and trying to get that balance right of not letting the money completely dictate your mindset, but knowing it is one of those frustrating constraints in all organizational life, particularly church life, where the passion for seeing God's work expanded is high, and we'd wish we had more resource to carry on and do it, but it's trying to just get that mindset right, and how you distill that within team who are responsible for budgets, I think is a real tricky one. And I think there's some real, one of the things I really like exploring, and I'm still developing in what I do with organizations, is just helping tell your financial story. I found it a really helpful way of bringing people on a journey of, if everyone really understands the financial story and the journey we're on, I found that it can help in certain of these exercises where you're wanting to help people run their budget well and be on board. So it's really fascinating, and it's sometimes a good challenge to go through, because sometimes having knowing that budgets are tighter than they were just helps us keep our eyes in the place they need to be on him who's the provider anyway. So
it's so important. Good. I mean, if you looked at my budget and kind of our teens and youth ministry, there was a senior teens group that we took away, about 30 of them on a weekend away, and everything was expensive and there wasn't ideal. But to bring these young people together after the pandemic was essential, and we'd pay 10 grand to take them away, because it's so important, and for their spiritual life and for the investment we want to make into them, the priority that they are. We ended up spending 3,000 or 4,000 in the end, but it was like, you know, they're going to go over their budget, and that's okay, because do you know what, this is a priority. And this, I just love how finances connect to ministry. I love the way that, you know, there's just something brilliant, isn't there? You know, you take a trip of young people away, and you can see it in your spreadsheet. And I love it. I just think, wow, God, this is incredible. That I get to be involved in this process and seeing ministry happen, enabling ministry to happen, going out and getting the quotes, going out and finding the venues, and saying to the ministry lead, it's paid for, go and enjoy it, go and bless these kids. Like there's something quite spectacular about being involved in that.
Absolutely. It's great to hear. It's great to hear, and it's one of the fascinating things that we find from the role we play is seeing what the total, you know, when you look at the big picture of the church in the UK, and obviously everyone is usually focused on their church finances, but when you multiply that up and see the amounts that are being invested in local community, and it's quite staggering. It really is quite staggering when particularly if you're a finance person like me, you kind of think, really where this cash is going and the investment it's having is really exciting, exciting. And so it's great to see.
Let me ask you another question then. So we've got a number of families coming from Ukraine, and as part of that, we've set up a Ukraine fund, because people want to give to it, you know, and even in the context, people are sacrificial in their giving and want to give to some of these causes, you know. So you know, food bank, we've seen an increase in giving for that. We've seen an increase in people helping clients that are going through CAP and Christians Against Poverty, and so lovely stuff. And churches are kind of goodwill and want to put these funds together, and the clarity about restricted funds and not restricted funds going into general. Give us some pointers here.
Give some good pointers. No, it's really good.
It's really important, isn't it? Because you want to use the money for the way that people give to the church for a Ukraine family. We want to separate that. So how do we do that?
It's really good. I think there's some really quickly on the kind of on the technical bits. Very simply is there are three classically main funds that you would have in a set of charity accounts. There's the unrestricted general fund, which you've mentioned, which is typically for any donation or income that comes in, which doesn't have anything legally attached to what it's meant to go for, and it's for the the general activities of the organisation and the church, just go into the pot. You then have a designated fund, which is usually ring fenced by the church leaders, trustees, however you're legally set up, and that is a choice to ring fence. So it's actually quite uncommon that you would get some income that goes into a designated fund, because it's the choice of an organisation to ring fence it. And then you get onto the restricted fund, which is really where you're alluding to with your examples, where the donor is giving a specific request that what it's going for, or if there is the church is giving an open invitation of this is what we're wanting to raise for, and it's given in the donation is given in that in the spirit of what it's been raised for. And we would always, if there's restricted funds, can be a little bit grey at times, because sometimes they're not as clear cut, and I always err on the side of caution where if it appears that this donation really is given for a cause, getting that ring fenced, particularly administratively in your finance system, or however you manage your finance, so it's very clear that this is where that income is meant to go. It can just make sure and create some really good transparency that this is what's come in and this is exactly where it's going, and that really does all boil down to really good financial administration of just making sure you've got the right money in the right pot, so that you know exactly where it's going. So yeah, very quickly, they're the kind of the
that's really helpful.
Tips,
and if you're in a small church and you're thinking about these, wanting to set up different funds, brilliant. Mission funds is often another common one. Where funds are restricted for international mission or something outside the church. So
absolutely.
So these are common things, and I think it's getting the tools, the right tools to manage it, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And communicating.
Oh, sorry. Go on.
I was just saying, communicating to donors what how the money's being used for those restricted funds. Yeah,
absolutely. If there are any listeners where you would really value some more input on fund accounting, I did a joint training session with Expense Plus software provider who we'd mentioned earlier in the pod. It's on YouTube. If you were just to Google Essentials Fund Accounting, that's on there. It covers a range of things. Brilliant. It was designed. We did that with a heart for really wanting to bless and equip users of Expense Plus, but it's out there on YouTube, and I found that people at random who've got in touch who are just looking for charity training, because there isn't loads of training out there for so if you think that would serve you well, have a look on YouTube. It's there. Great. And it'll give you a little bit more detailed accounting-y stuff on fund accounting.
That's great. So, send me the link, and we'll add it to this to the video and resources. And I think that's the other thing, isn't it? We don't always know confidently where we can go for help, and so Expense Plus is a very useful tool, and yourself, and there are other people, and I think it's a really important thing for church administrators and operations directors to develop a relationship with their accountant, with their auditor. Let's develop a good two-way communication. We don't want to just I don't want to just speak to my accountant when we're ready to hand over the paperwork and we've got queries to deal with, but let's build that friendship and relationship.
Absolutely. And there's often a tension there. There's accountants everywhere, left, right and center across the UK, and a typical accountant would have that one-to-one interaction. But if you are able to build that relationship, it can be really fruitful, and it can help shape what you're doing and how you're doing it, and go on a journey. So it's a good top tip, I would.
It's good. And are you providing services outside of Leeds? Do you actually exit the boundaries?
Yeah, absolutely. It's really interesting, actually. We because of relationships and the internet and just networking, we support churches across the UK. We had a quick look at the map, actually, and I think our furthest north is north of Newcastle, and our furthest south is bottom of Cornwall. So we stretch. Wow. But we I think it's important to say we're only a small family practice who are just really passionate about what we do in serving the church and charities, and we know that we are not here to change the scene of the accounting world. We very much try and do what we do as best as we can, and we know that means we can only serve a number of clients. But we know there are accounts up and down the country who do a really great job, who even if they aren't built on Christian principles, are really good and know what they're doing. So if you are really struggling with your relationship with your accountant, it is one of those things that do. If you're able to invest in it, go for it. But we do, and we, if churches, one of the things we are currently specifically exploring, which we've only got space for a few more, but is the challenge that churches are having at the moment with finance skill set. It's actually one of the things that really worries me about the church in the next few years, in down the road, is there is definitely a generation who have served the church for years and years, probably like my grandfather, actually, because he was the treasurer of his church for years and years and years, who are desperate to hand on the baton of the church treasurer finance role, and there is just a real difficulty of that being handed on. And as I know we've briefly chatted before on this, and I know you've had listeners get in touch, and we have people get in touch with us, and we know Expense Plus having conversation all the time that churches are desperate for finance skill set. I even had a conversation with a head operations manager in our area, very large church, who'd been trying to recruit a finance manager for quite a considerable time and just hadn't been able to, which really made my eyes pop, actually, because I thought, like that is a church who can afford a good, well-skilled finance manager, and they're struggling. And there is this whole area of church outsourcing, finance outsourcing, which is becoming it's becoming a necessity for churches, and working through what that looks like is tricky. And what I do know is we will only be able to serve a few more churches, and I know they'll keep, we'll keep having the conversations. But one of the things I'm keen to go on the journey of doing is trying to help equip churches to navigate that well. So I'm hoping to be able to produce a few video casts and various other bits to be able to help churches do that, because it's really tricky to work out. We have had our finances in this church for years and years and years, and what does it mean to bring someone else involved? So if we're able to help churches navigate that, then in any sort of capacity, then that's great. But it's one of the things that does concern me about what's coming up in the future, is actually how churches manage their finance, because it's, as we sadly know, finances are critical for doing what we do.
So for ministry, absolutely right. I think I to add to that, I think I've come across so many churches where their treasurers are 70 plus years old, and they've tried for the last 10 years to try and find someone to help. And,
tried for the last 70 years.
70 years.
To pass on, man. You're absolutely right. But
one of the questions I was going to finish on is, what do you see coming down the line? What are some of the challenges? And I think this is a genuine need. We've found it difficult to find somebody who's trained in Sage, a young person or a younger person who's interested in it. And so we've outsourced our finances. And I've got to say, it has been fantastic, but it took us time to find a company that we could really work with, who really understood us, who really could work within our kind of, workflows and the way that we do things. So it isn't impossible to outsource, and there are some good things. We find it a challenge because we don't have any live data. We're always waiting 2 or 3 months for that live data. And so there are challenges in that, and maybe a bigger church that needs information to make decisions and do things. But you're right. It seems a sad thing that we have to do that, because we don't have people coming up who are called to this. So if you're listening and you've got finance skills and you're not serving as a treasurer, get alongside and encourage a treasurer.
Absolutely.
Find ways that you can, begin to start the journey of maybe this is God called you to serve the church in this way. And that's the question to be asking.
It's a really good question. And the other big encouragement I would give to churches is, historically, I think the treasurer role has been this all-encompassing huge whopper of a role that just accumulates stuff. It's very Yorkshire chat, that, not very specific. Just give it stuff. But with modern systems, particularly cloud-based package, whether it's Expense Plus or others, it is much easier to split out tasks, roles, positions, and so it's much easier to be able to do that. So you could end up, I could absolutely see a church that has 4 people who volunteer their time in making the system run efficiently and quickly, that doesn't demand a humongous commitment. And that absolutely exists. And one of the things with outsourcing, if any church goes through it, is they realize we've got to go through the process of chunking out what the treasurer was doing. Oh my gosh, this is what the treasurer was actually doing when we work it out. Well, we should have split this up years ago. And actually, it's a really good exercise to do, even if you're not, even you're not that place, of seeing actually how could this be separated and split out and made efficient. So.
And we've seen that. I've seen churches have moved to kind of finance committees and splitting those roles, and it's great. And if you're in ministry, right, we're talking finances. One of the most frustrating things for finance people, treasurers, is not getting the receipts. You're having to chase people up for things. And I know there's tools out there now that you can take a picture and it's easier. And we want to move towards making it easy for our ministry guys. But ministry guys, would you bless our finance guys and hand over those receipts?
Absolutely.
And make our lives that bit easier. That would be wonderful.
Amen.
Joking aside, yeah, but there's an amen there. I can hear that amen. Mate, this is great. This is helpful. And if you put together these videos and you want a place to put them, you can stick them on our site. We would love to see treasurers invested, people trained in governance, people trained in this whole area of finance.
Absolutely.
So
let's
talk more.
It's a watch this space, I think, for any listeners. I'm sorry I'm not coming on saying, oh, and here's this fantastic load of resources we've got, but it's not. I think that there's what I do know is there's ongoing conversations, and in the finance church charity spectrum, stewardship serve very well with their resources. There is Expense Plus and others who are filling a space, and we absolutely see there seems to be a gap, and I think there's a few people who are keen to keep exploring.
Great.
To pull it, and if there's any listeners out there who are keen to go on the journey, then do get in touch, and I'd love to hear and continue this wider conversation that's happening in church finance land. So yeah,
mate, thanks for doing this. You're probably doing this on your lunch break, and so thank you so much.
Oh, it's not a problem at all. Mate. Not a problem at all. It's a break from the spreadsheets and the analysis, so it's all good. It's not a problem.
Yeah, and I understand why Penny thinks you are wicked. I love it. You've served us well today, mate. So thanks for that.
Not a problem at all. Not a problem at all. Thanks for having me.
Great. Well, listeners, if you've got any questions, if you've got any follow-up, then Tim is brilliant. Send them into questions@thechurchoffice.co.uk. We would love to hear from you. And if there's more information you want to hear about restricted funds and other things, then get in contact. We'd love to be able to serve you and point you, even if we just signpost you in a direction that says, this is a great resource. Check this out. Mate, finance and stuff is so important, and it's so important for gospel ministry that we have this in place. And you may not think that you're playing your part by doing the finances, but let me tell you, let me make the connection for you. This is so important to ministry, to the good news of Jesus going out to new people that will change their life, and you doing what you do enables that to happen. So please know our encouragement in some way today, this afternoon.
Yeah, big time.
All right.
Yeah,
big time.
Big time. Yeah. Fantastic.
Well, thank you for your time, listeners. Enjoy. Please check out other podcasts. Please check out our website for resources, and we'd love to connect with you. All right. Goodbye.